Welcome, everyone. So good to see so many people here this afternoon. My name is Paul Poiker, and I'm archivist at the Moravian Archives in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. And today I will present to you a painting that has recently been discovered. This lecture is going to be recorded, and in order to protect your privacy, everybody's video is turned off, and please make sure you stay muted. If you have any questions, you can put those in the chat, and after my presentation, Thomas McCullough will moderate the question and answer section of our event this afternoon. One of the exciting things of my job as archivist for the Moravian Church is adding items to the collection. Of course, we regularly receive records from Moravian agencies and Moravian churches. We also purchase many new books for our library, but I mean something else. Once in a while, we are able to add something unusual and rare to our holdings. For example, in recent years, a donor has given Moravian silverware to the archives. Others have donated or bequeathed paintings and other objects. We keep an eye out for rare books on the Moravians that we do not have in our collection yet. And over the years, we have been able to fill many gaps. So I get regular information from auction houses and book dealers. Most of the time, the notifications can be quickly deleted. But on November 11th of last year, one of the items drew my attention. And you see the email here. The items that are suggested all seem to have to do something with Bethlehem. Photos and engravings of the town of Bethlehem in Palestine, 2 carved mother-of-pearl shell plaques with Christian scenes, and a nativity painting. And it was the nativity painting that immediately looked interesting. Style and composition looked Moravian to me. As you can see, not much information was given about the artist, religious master, and this was the additional information that they provided. An art historian in the Netherlands had dated the painting, 18th century, she thought, and she also thought it was probably Dutch or German. The art historian in The Hague drew particular attention to the scene in the upper right corner, and I read from her text. In the upper right corner of the painting, a key event of the Christmas story takes place. One can recognize standing and lying figures grouped around a dying campfire. Blinded by a glaring light, they hold their hands in front of their faces to protect their eyes. These are the shepherds who keep night watch over their flock near Bethlehem, and to whom a brightly shining angel announces the birth of the Messiah. Soon the shepherds will set off to search for the child wrapped in swaddling clothes and lying in a manger. And because she used the word Bethlehem in her description, that is why I got this alert. I showed the painting to others, colleagues, board members, and people who know about Moravian art, and everybody seemed to agree this certainly looks like a Moravian painting. The most prolific Moravian painter from the 18th century was John Valentine Haidt. He was born in 1700 in what was then the German city of Danzig. Today it's Gdansk. He grew up in Berlin and Dresden, and then he settled as a goldsmith in London, where he married Katharina Compiègne. And then in 1738, he joined the Moravians in London. He moves to Herrenhaag, the center of the Moravian Church in Germany at the time. In 1748, he goes to Herrnhut. In 1752, he goes back to London, where he's part of the Moravian community. And in 1754, he is sent over to Pennsylvania, and he spent many, many years here in Bethlehem, where he painted, where he also served as a minister. And in 1780, he died here in Bethlehem. So here you see the painting that was offered. It is an odd thing with Moravian art. I know several Moravian archivists who have become very interested in Moravian art, and many of you will remember Vernon Nelson, who wrote an extensive book on Moravian painter John Valentine Haidt. 19th century Herrnhut archivist Alexander Glitch published a catalog of the painting collection of the Herrnhut Archives. Rüdiger Kröger, who was archivist in Herrnhut after me, published many articles on Moravian painters, including Gustav Grunewald, who was also a painter here in Bethlehem. And when I was archivist in Herrnhut, I collected references to paintings in the congregational diaries. How were paintings used and how are they described? You might say that I collected paintings that no longer existed. I am not an art historian, but I was interested in the paintings as examples of the material culture of the Moravians. How did Moravians use art to express their theology and to create a common identity? And what I found was that the paintings that survived in the collection of the Unity Archives in Herrnhut represented only a small fraction of what Moravian art looked like in the 18th century. Most of the paintings in the Unity Archives are portraits. I found that originally many other paintings existed as well, paintings of biblical scenes and symbolical paintings. Most of these biblical and symbolical paintings had been lost. The reason for this loss was that later generations of Moravians probably could not appreciate these paintings so much. Moravians no longer cared for the blood and wounds devotion of the 18th century, and the overall style of the biblical paintings became outdated and seemed old-fashioned. So paintings were removed, fell into disrepair, and were lost. This happened here in Bethlehem as well. Haidt painted a series of paintings for the old chapel, showing scenes from the life of Christ. And when the central church building was finished in 1806, and the old chapel was no longer used for worship, nobody wanted to have the paintings that were in the old chapel. So the elders decided in 1810 to sell these paintings for $60 to a man who collected curiosities for his museum in Boston. In Europe, many Moravian portraits survive, but there are hardly any examples of paintings showing biblical motives. There were several biblical paintings in the Saal or chapel of the Gemeinhaus in Herrnhut, but they were lost when the center of Herrnhut burned on the last day of World War II. In Niesky, Germany, there is a painting by Haidt showing the crucifixion of Christ. And this is a rare example of a biblical painting by Haidt that survives in Germany. Interestingly, the Moravian Historical Society in Nazareth owns a painting by Haidt that is very similar. Let's put them next to each other here. On the left, we have the Niesky painting. On the right, we have the one in Nazareth. The composition of both paintings is very similar. And we may assume that Haidt either remembered very well how he did certain things, or he had notes and sketches that he used when he was painting. For our presentation today, it is important to remember that Haidt used similar motifs and similar compositions throughout his life. Paintings he painted on both sides of the Atlantic sometimes show great similarities. This realization helped us to determine if the painting that was up for auction in Germany was really a Haidt. Let us now look at other work by Haidt to see what we can find. I would like to show a few other nativity paintings by Haidt. This painting is one that the Moravian Archives in Bethlehem already had in its collection. And this is a painting showing the Nativity that is in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, in the State Museum of Pennsylvania. And I think that there are interesting parallels between those known Nativity paintings and the one that we recently discovered. So let's put these two next to each other. On the left, the painting at the Moravian Archives, and on the right, the new painting. They have a similar composition, Mary and Joseph and the child. The woman in the background is missing, and so are the animals that are here. The child is seen on a similar white cloth. The hay has been painted in similar ways, the straw. But what is missing are the two beams here in the foreground. And I think they are reminiscent of the cross. Striking is the similarity with Joseph. Both Josephs have the same posture, one hand on the heart, and the other hand inviting the viewer into the scene. Now, I put up the painting in Harrisburg on the left, the painting at the State Museum. And this time, the shepherds and the angels are part of the scene. But the child in the manger looks very similar. And also Joseph's posture is similar. And in the background, you can see that the woman is present again. There are two other elements that deserve further attention, Mary's dress and the animals in the background. On the left, we see a detail from the Nativity we recently purchased. And on the top right, a detail from the one in Harrisburg. On the bottom right, a detail from the Nativity that was already in the Moravian Archives. Not only is Mary wearing a red garment in each image, she has the same yellowish looking sleeve on each painting. And on the one on the left and the top one, you can also see something white sticking out from underneath, or all three of them, from underneath the yellow sleeve. Let's look at the animals now. The animals are a little harder to see in the background, but here behind Mary, you see there's an ox, and behind the ox, there is even a very faint ass. On the painting in Harrisburg, the same ox is protruding from the back, and I think the current word for that is photobombing. And you can even see a donkey in the background. A typical thing for Haidt are his hands. Hands were not Haidt's forte. The fingers often look like asparagus, and that is European white asparagus and not American green asparagus. Here I put together some examples of hands that Haidt did, and they're all of different qualities. When we look at the hand of Joseph in the painting at the auction, it's actually well done. You can see the veins on his hand, and also the hands of the woman in the background, which is cut off a little bit right now, is interesting because I've never seen Haidt doing hands where two hands are entangled in this way. So in fact, when I was first looking at these hands, I thought they're really too good to be painted by Haidt. But then I looked at baby Jesus and at Mary's hands, and I saw it. Yes, typical Haidt. Let us now focus on Mary for a moment. Valentine Haidt wrote a treatise of art in which he talks about how he thought Mary was to be portrayed. And this treatise has been translated into English and published in the Journal of History by my predecessor, Vernon Nelson. And I read from this treatise, and he writes here, Mary must have in her all the beauty that can be possibly imagined. A beautiful, not too round and not too lengthy shape of the head, a flat forehead, a straight, longish nose, large eyes, whose eyelids are large and inclined downward, the mouth small and full of loveliness, the chin middle-sized, the cheeks flat, in which modesty can be read. At the first sight, one must be filled with amazement at her beauty, and at the same time with respectful reverence and shame before her true holiness, simplicity, and humility. End of quote. And it was Mary's downward gaze that struck me when I first saw this painting, and I'm grateful to Tom McCullough for drawing my attention to this text, and it confirms that this is exactly how Haidt wanted to portray Mary. I would now like to look at the image in the upper right corner. And this is also something that the art historian drew attention to, who worked for the auction house. This is a technique that Haidt sometimes uses. He refers to another part of the story by placing another picture into the image. And this is, he does it in this painting as well. We see here a group portrait of 9 people who played a part in the recognition of the Moravians by British Parliament in 1749. And that doesn't interest so much, but in the background, you can see a series of 4 other images, and that the 3 ones on the left show a visit of a Moravian, Arvid Gradin, with the Greek patriarch in Constantinople. And the one on the right is an encounter that Zinzendorf had with Thomas Mamuka in Riga. And Thomas Mamuka is also known, he's seen in the First Fruits painting. But so Haidt is putting other scenes here in the background. He does something similar in this painting. This painting shows us Zinzendorf with a Danish royal order. And in the background, Haidt has placed the town of Herrnhut. You can see Herrnhut here, and here in the foreground, God's Acre. So this is an enlargement of the scene in the upper right corner of our new Nativity. And this is the Annunciation to the shepherds. We can see an angel in the sky. We see men covering their eyes. And and in the center, an additional man. We see a campfire with smoke, and we see sheep here on the left-hand side. The Wachovia Historical Society in Winston-Salem in North Carolina owns a few Haidt paintings, and they have a painting, a full painting of the Annunciation by Haidt. And this is the image that is in Winston-Salem. And I think it would be good to put the two next to each other to compare them. So on the left, you see the painting in Winston-Salem, and on the right, you see the detail of the painting that we purchased at the auction. So again, you see a man covering his eyes on the left in the Wachovia painting, on ours on the right. There's a central figure. In our painting, he's covering his eyes. In the Wachovia painting, he's holding his hand up to the angel in the sky. The hovering angel in the sky, you see on both. And in the center, there is the fire. There's some sheep here. Another element that is interesting is the woman that appears here. And we also find her in the painting that is in Harrisburg. It is a bit of a mystery, to me at least, who this woman represents. When you look at paintings from the period of the Annunciation to the shepherds, general paintings, you can Google that, and you can see hundreds and hundreds of similar paintings. You see that sometimes a younger looking woman is placed in the image. Often she's milking a cow, and Haidt must have had a reason to place her in the painting. She must have represented an element of the story that was important to Moravians at the time. So here again we have, this is in our painting, and here we see the woman in the painting that is in Winston-Salem. You can also see that Haidt even dresses them the same. So there is a red armband, and you see that on the painting in Winston-Salem as well. So he gives these people the same outfit. This is an example of a general image, not Moravian, but it's from a Bible. That Bible was owned by Haidt, according to Vernon Nelson. And in this, the Bible is full of engravings, and that many of these engravings have similarities with Haidt's work. And here you see a woman here in the background, and there's also one here in the Nativity. So now I am putting both the Harrisburg Nativity and the newly acquired Nativity next to each other. The one in Harrisburg is on the left. The question is, are these two paintings painted by the same artist? And you do not have to be an expert to see that there is a great difference in quality. My former colleague, Leni Jaswinski, and I have talked about this a lot. How is it possible that the same painter created paintings that were so different in quality? We can see this change in overall quality with his other work as well. For example, when we compare Haidt's first fruits paintings, this is the earliest known first fruits painting that he did in 1747 in Herrenhaag, and today it is in Zeist in the Netherlands. And here you see the same theme, but Haidt painted this in the 1760s in Bethlehem. A detail from the Bethlehem first fruits painting, and the same detail from his painting in 1747. So it's not just a matter of that the one on the left has a varnish that has darkened. I think there is a difference in quality. So we see a similar thing with the Nativity painting we just acquired, a difference in quality. The one on the right looks much better than the painting on the left, and I do not have a real explanation for this phenomenon. To make a long story short, we decided to bid on the painting. The auction took place on November 21st in Sulzburg in southwest Germany, and we won the bid. And on January 22nd, a large box was delivered. It came here by airplane from Frankfurt, and inside there was the painting. And we were very excited to have this painting. It is an early work of Haidt. It is a biblical painting from his European period, and not many survive from that. Not many biblical paintings survive from that period. It is of a good quality, and we do not have that many examples of Haidt's work in this quality here in America. And then it was an unknown painting. Nobody knew that it existed, and we are very glad that we were able to bring it back into a Moravian collection. The painting is in relative good shape, but there are some traces of earlier repairs, like here you can see some repairs, but also there's places where paint is flaking off, and there are even some holes in the canvas. Sorry about that. So our plan is to have it restored, have it conserved in the near future. And if you would like to make this possible, we would be delighted to receive your donation. After the presentation, you will receive an email with a link telling you how to help us with that. And feel free to stop by at the Moravian Archives to see this painting. It's up on display in our back gallery. And when you are here, you can also visit our current exhibit, Zinzendorf in America. Because of COVID regulations, we do like to ask you to call ahead and tell us when you are coming. Thank you all for listening to me, and
thank you, Paul, for this fascinating presentation. Now we have until 5 p.m. Oh, I should say also, Paul, congratulations on the great detective work in attributing the painting to Haidt. We have until 5 p.m. for questions and answers with our presenter. So if anyone has a question, you'll see that some questions have already come in. You can type them into the chat box. I'll be keeping an eye on the chat box, and we'll direct as many of the questions that the audience directs or the audience asks directly to Paul. And while you're typing your questions, I was planning to ask you a question of my own, but Bobby Bourne also had the same question. Paul, could you tell us a little bit about the provenance of the painting? Who's owned it over time? Where has it been kept before it made its way here to Bethlehem?
Yes, so our first thought was because of the location of the auction house in southwest Germany, there is an old Moravian community nearby, Königsfeld in the Black Forest. So we thought maybe it comes from there, but the auction house said, no, it's from a private collections in southern Germany. On the back of the painting, there are initials, CDVL. And yeah, that could be the name of a former owner. And if it was a Moravian, CD, the name Christian David is popular in Moravian circles. V could stand for von. And so we've been looking at last names, Moravian last names that start with von, and there are a few, but that would be complete speculation. So after we received the painting, the auction house informed us that the former owner was a Roman Catholic priest, a German priest who served in Rome for most of his life and had this painting with him in Rome. And when he came back to Germany upon his retirement, he brought the painting with him again and then put it up for auction. That's all we know about the provenance. Yeah, in many cases, Moravian paintings have been given away, have been sold, like the paintings here in Bethlehem. So it's very well possible that somehow this painting got out of Moravian hands.
Thank you. This is all very interesting. Thank you for sharing those details about the painting's journey across space and time. One of our audience members, Barbara Dietrich, asks, what is the size of the newly acquired painting? The size, and have you compared it to the Adoration of the Shepherds painting that is at the Moravian Historical Society?
The size is, and I have to answer you here in metrics because we were telling the shipping company in Germany what the size was, and it's about 1 meter by a meter. And I'm sure that you all know how to convert that into American measurements. So it's fairly large, which suggests that it was used, if it was used in a Moravian setting, that it was probably in a worship space, in a zaal. And I don't think I have a copy of the painting in Nazareth. I need to look at that to compare those. So I haven't compared it with the painting that is in the at the Moravian Historical Society.
Thank you. Thank you. You mentioned during your presentation that you thought it might be an earlier painting of Haidt based on the level of skill that he shows in the painting. Edward Quinter asks, what is your best guess on a possible date for this painting?
Yes. So Haidt came over to America in 1754. He joined the Moravians in 1738, and I think based on what I remember from his memoir or Lebenslauf, he started painting for the Moravians in 1744. He was really not a painter. He was a goldsmith. But when he joined the Moravians, then that's when he started painting. And he writes in his memoir how much the Moravians appreciated his art. So it must have been painted between 1744 and 1754 when he came to America.
Okay, great. So that rules out a question that I had lingering. I knew Haidt that had spent time in Italy as a younger man when he was learning to become a goldsmith. So there's probably no possibility that he painted this between 1718, 1724 in his early life.
Well, we cannot exclude anything, but I think that this painting also shows some general Moravian things that were important to the Moravians. For example, the way Christ, the baby Jesus, is depicted when you look at paintings of the Lamentation, that is when Christ is taken off the cross and are held by his disciples. Christ is depicted in very similar ways with the cloth and also the stiffness of the body. Then there are these beams in the foreground that remind us of the cross. And for Moravians in the 18th century, it was very important when they celebrated Christmas. They also celebrated Good Friday, and Christmas and the Passion went together. So in this painting, you clearly see Moravian theology. It's not only showing the Nativity, but it's also pointing at Jesus's suffering on the cross. And that makes me believe that it must have been painted during his Moravian period.
That sounds pretty convincing to me. Lester Morris writes, "What a remarkable treasure of Moravian history. I'm amazed by the detective work. What goes into restoring a painting like this?"
Yes, we work with a conservator in Philadelphia. In fact, Lester, he lives around the corner from you. And he has restored several paintings for us. And I think what he would suggest is to stabilize the paint. You can see how the paint is flaking. And I'm sure he will do in painting, which means he will fill those gaps that are missing. And he will do it in a way that for later generations, it will be clear what is a later addition and what is original. He will probably put this painting on a new canvas. What it looks like to me is that this is probably the original canvas and it has become very thin. So this fabric that is now almost 300 years old, of course, is very fragile. And when we move the painting, you can see that it moves, which will also cause more damage and more paint could flake off. So I assume that he will suggest to put it on a more stable canvas. And then the old varnish will be removed, and varnish tends to get darker over time, and he will apply a new varnish, and the painting will then look closer to what it looked like originally.
Great. Shifting gears, Gretchen Denton asks, any ideas that speculate on the unknown woman?
I am sure that in literature, in textbooks on art history, I'm sure that there is a way of finding out who this is, because Haidt was following existing traditions. What I've done myself is I have looked at Christmas sermons from the 1740s to see if Moravians talked about the shepherds and then talked about this person. And I have not found anything, but that is certainly also an avenue to follow, to look in what did Zinzendorf and what did other Moravians say about the Annunciation to the shepherds, and if any of these people were also mentioned. There's also a child in the painting that is in Winston-Salem, and maybe it suggests that this is symbolic for everyone. Christ is announced to the entire world, men, women, young people, older people, but that's pure speculation on my side.
Okay. Jared Burkholder comments, but maybe this is something that you want to comment on as well. He wrote, I noticed that in the Bible engraving, Mary has similar hand positions as the painted scenes. One hand lifting the blanket, one hand under the crook of Jesus' arm. It seems to add weight to your comments that Haidt may have used this engraving as a model.
Yes, that's a very good point, Jared. In this Bible, there are other engravings, and in the book that Vernon Nelson wrote on Haidt, and that was edited by June Schluter, and I'm happy to see her here in our presentation. In that book, we show some of the other engravings from this Bible with other paintings where there is great similarity. So it's very well possible that this was his Bible and that he used these engravings as a source of inspiration. The Bible is heavily worn, and there are many, many spots that look to me like what could be ink spots. And although the Bible doesn't have Haidt's name in it, it's very well possible that this was his Bible. We have several books that Haidt used to own. About 10 books are in our collection that have the name of Haidt in it as a former owner. So yes, we do have books that were owned by him.
Barry Pell writes, do we know any other contemporary artists who painted in a style or styles similar to Haidt?
Yeah, that is something I cannot answer. Don't know enough about art to answer that, but I remember the assessment of the Dutch art historian that she wrote for the auction house, where she compares this with other European artists. And I think she compared this to earlier art, to 17th century or 16th century artists. And she found parallels, but I think that has to be left to real experts.
You are an expert, Paul. David Bloom writes, many Protestant churches have the opinion that biblical paintings should not be displayed in a church or sanctuary. Is it possible that Moravians in the early 19th century also were influenced by this attitude?
That is very well possible, that Moravians themselves began to think that that in a Protestant church there should not be any paintings. At the time, in the 18th century, people who came to visit Moravian places were surprised to see that there were paintings in the churches and chapels. But then we know that, for example, in Herrnhut, the paintings stayed up until 1945. And these paintings that were put up in the 1740s remained there for 200 years. And the people in Herrnhut never thought to remove them from the Kleiner Saal. But maybe they weren't comfortable with having them in the big church. In any case, it's possible that Moravians just didn't like that anymore. It's also a certain type of art that, it becomes old-fashioned. It doesn't appeal to people, and we clearly see it as something historical, but it's something else if you want to have that in your church or in other places.
Thank you. Leo Baufanfletter asks, were there others who helped him paint with painting?
Yes, we know that he had students and that he trained others. One of his students was Benjamin West. For a while, Haidt was Moravian minister in Philadelphia, and that's where he trained Benjamin West. Benjamin West went to England and became a really famous painter, and much better than his teacher. And I think we know a few names of students he had here in Bethlehem, and I would think that he had helpers in Germany as well.
Thank you. Gretchen Denton comments, Mary looks surprisingly older than we imagine her today. It looks like that might be all the questions in the chat. If anyone has any more questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. I guess I have here's one from Bobby Bourne. Has there ever been an exhibit featuring Haidt's works either at the archives or elsewhere?
I think there has been. It was definitely before my time. My predecessor, Vernon Nelson, was very, very interested in Haidt, and he has done a lot of research on Haidt. He has discovered several Haidt paintings that weren't known before. The painting that I showed with the images on top was bought at an auction in London in the 1980s, and he acquired that for the archives here. He discovered a long-lost painting that Haidt did in Cambridge. Haidt did paintings for Lindsay House in Chelsea, London, and some of those paintings burned during the Second World War, but one was already in Cambridge earlier, and he discovered that one. And I'm pretty sure that Vernon Nelson did an exhibit with Haidt paintings, but it may be time to do another exhibit with paintings by Haidt, because there are a lot of people who did not see the earlier exhibits, and some new work has appeared. It would, of course, be nice to be able to combine work by Haidt on both sides of the Atlantic. And I must add that before we purchase this painting, I contacted my colleagues in Herrnhut and told them about this, and also with previous paintings that we've bought. Because, yeah, I do feel a little bit like we're buying these things in Europe and taking them to America, and shouldn't they be in the archives in Herrnhut? And my colleague said, well, just go ahead, you know, if you can raise the money to do this, because that would be something much more difficult to do in Herrnhut at this time. So I think it's important that we purchased these and added them to a Moravian collection, be it here in America or in Europe.
Speaking of purchasing these paintings, do you think that there are more out there? This is a question for me.
Definitely, definitely. I'm always surprised to see what shows up at auctions and what is out there. Yes, there are paintings in private hands, and I know that, for example, in Berlin, there's a painting of the Zinzendorf family. We were able to borrow that in the year 2000 when we did a Zinzendorf exhibit. But then after the exhibit, it went back to Berlin, and I don't know what happened. I don't even know if these people are still alive. And that's often the case with these valuable items when they are in private hands. Yes, of course, it's nice when someone can enjoy it at home, but then yeah, the climate at home is not often the best, and things can happen. We have greater security, and that is why, and I see some of those people here in our audience today, why people then decide to donate paintings to a museum like the Moravian Historical Society, or to the Moravian Archives, or to the Unity Archives in Herrnhut. And a while ago, we received paintings by another artist, Grunewald, and the former owner was a heavy smoker and liked to smoke in the room where the paintings were. And when we took that to our conservator, the layer of nicotine was removed. So I always think it's better when these things are in a climatized environment, like something that we can offer here.
Great. Jeffrey Long asks, did Haidt use live models for his paintings? I ask because the Christ figure in the One First Fruits painting resembles Zinzendorf.
I don't know. I assume that he had sitters. And yes, indeed, the painting on the first fruits, the Christ in the first fruits from 1747, greatly he definitely looks like Zinzendorf. And for those of you who are familiar with that painting and the way it's shown in Zeist, in the Kleinersaal in Zeist, in the small chapel, on the other side of the room, there is a bust of Zinzendorf, and you can compare the two. And it's very obvious that that Moravians saw Christ reflected in Zinzendorf, and that also comes through in Haidt's work. He must have used sitters also to help him paint.
Thank you for your response there. Edward Quinner writes, was it Haidt who painted the birth and crucifixion scenes used to explain these scenes to American Indians in early missionary work?
Yes, as far as we know, that was Haidt. At that time, we are not aware of other Moravian artists in the communities here. The situation was different in Europe, where there were several artists who were good and who painted. So sometimes we cannot, we do not know for sure who the artist was of Moravian art that was done in Europe, because Moravians did not sign their artwork, or for most of the cases they didn't sign. And then in Europe, there were several artists, but here in America, there was only Haidt and his students. So we can be pretty sure that the paintings that were done here were done by Haidt. I am aware of 2 paintings by Haidt that are signed by him, and they are both at the Unity Archives in Herrnhut.
Fascinating. One question that I had thought of before your presentation, and now I'm thinking of it more, that if there's maybe one thing, we have over 50 Haidt paintings in the collection here. What do you find to be the newest or element that this particular painting brings to the collection?
Yes, of course, we have to justify why we spend money on a painting if we already have more than 50 paintings by Haidt in the collection. I think this one is an example of a biblical painting that Haidt did from a period where there's not much work surviving. We know that Haidt did biblical paintings in Europe, but this is one of the few examples of that. It's also an example of Haidt from the period when he really took the time and carefully painted these. It was a painting that we didn't know before. So I think if we hadn't bid on this, who knows where it would have ended up, and maybe it would never have been recognized as a Moravian painting. I think it definitely adds a lot about what we know about Haidt and how he created his paintings.
Very interesting, very interesting. Scott Gordon asks a question, and maybe this is good for our last question. Has it ever been possible to track down any of the Haidt paintings that were sold to some Bostonian in the early 19th century?
Yes, I know that my predecessor, Vernon Nelson, worked on this. And what we know is that the person who bought them started a museum in Boston, a museum of American curiosities. And that museum has continued, and Scott, you must know it better than I, in some museum that is still in Boston. It was the basis for a museum that still exists, but I cannot think of the name. And when I looked into the history of that museum, there were several fires reported. And from what I remember is that there was fairly early, there was a fire that seemed to suggest that the paintings that they bought here in Bethlehem were destroyed. But who knows? It is possible that indeed in Boston or wherever else, some of these paintings that were originally in the old chapel are still there. And of course, nowadays we have very different ways of researching this. In the days before the internet, this was a much more difficult project to engage in. So who knows? Maybe they still exist. The ones in Nazareth, and that's the interesting thing. So in the Nazareth chapel and the Zaal that existed in Nazareth, there were paintings that Haidt did, and they were then transferred to the Whitfield House, or they are currently in the Whitfield House. So they became part of the collection of the Moravian Historical Society. In Bethlehem in 1810, I believe they were sold. There was no historical organization yet. That started a little later. So if they had waited a little bit, these paintings that were in the old chapel may have ended up in some museum collection here in Bethlehem already.
Thank you, Paul. Bobby Bourne writes, thank you for a fascinating and very fun program, Paul and Tom. Looking forward to the next art detection episode. And I'll add on to that. Thank you, Paul, for this interesting lecture and for taking the time to answer so many fantastic questions. Thanks as well to everyone for attending this virtual lecture today. It's now just before 5 p.m. and our session must come to a close. But before it does, I'd like to draw your attention to the 7th Bethlehem Conference on Moravian History and Music, which features papers and performances that explore Moravian church history and music from the 15th all the way up to the 21st century. So this fully virtual conference takes place in a couple weeks from April 20th to 24th. You can find out more information and register for free for this conference at www.moravianconferences.org. Don't worry about scrambling to write down that link. You'll receive an email with this link if you attended the lecture today. So thanks again all for coming, and we're so happy to see you're here, and we hope to see you again here on Zoom soon. Take care.